One shot, and every gun on Sorvon's flagship went dark. Not the hull, not the engines, not the shield grid humming somewhere behind him. Just the guns, all 40 of them, gone quiet in the same half-second, and nothing else touched. That was the wrong part. A hit that clean did not happen by accident. High Marshal Sorvath Krell looked at the console and understood, for the first time in 312 years, what it felt like to be measured and found wanting. He did not shout. His throat ridges, pulsing since the crossing began, went still. Behind him, 3 paces back where regulation put him, Sub-Commander Ulick Thorne let out a breath he had been holding for 12 seconds. He had been holding breaths like that for weeks now, and letting them out never got easier. "Open the Imperial channel," Sorvon said. "The wide one. Every installation, every receiver in range." Ulick's hand moved to the console. He did not press the data pad face down this time. There was nothing left to disagree with. The channel opened. Sorvon's voice, when it came, was very even. "The Terran Compact's territorial boundary markers are legally established and recognized under galactic convention. Rethan forces today operated within Terran sovereign space without authorization. No heat in it, no ridges, just facts laid out one after another, like a man reading a list he had written himself and did not enjoy. All Rethan units are ordered to withdraw to pre-expansion positions." Beyond the forward viewport, ships sat dark and disabled, drifting where they had stopped. No one had told him yet how many. No one had told him yet what it had cost, either, only that it had happened, and that it had happened exactly the way someone else had planned. No cheering on the bridge, no alarms left to sound, no orders left to give that meant anything. Ulick watched him and thought of the file sitting untouched on Sorvon's own reader. 900 pages. He had read every one of them twice. "You'll want to know how it got to this point. Trust me, it's worth staying for." 3 years earlier, Admiral Darrow Vance filled out an incident report during a quiet shift, because Command always wanted the forms before anything else, and there was no sense fighting that. "Get ahead of it," she liked to say. "Do the paperwork before anyone asks for it." On the wall behind her, 12 screens tracked a fleet that had not moved in 3 weeks except to grow larger. She had a leather journal on the desk beside her, worn soft at the corners, and she did not open it. Not yet. She only opened it when something ended. Captain Artie stood near the second screen, doing arithmetic in his head that he did not like the answer to. 230 ships, he said. That's not a patrol. No, Vance agreed. It isn't. She did not look up from the form. 6 weeks after that, on the Rethan flagship Sovereign Mandate, High Marshal Sorvath Krell stood at the observation port and looked out at a line of orange lights strung across the dark, 400 kilometers apart, blinking patient and slow into the black. "A string of lanterns," he said, and something in his throat ridges pulsed with real amusement. "They think this stops an empire." 3 paces behind him, Ulick held the data pad against his chest and said nothing. "You disagree, Sub-Commander." "I would ask the High Marshal to review the full threat assessment, not the summary, the full file." "I have read the summary." Sorvon did not turn around. 41 civilizations. Survey ships first, then diplomats, then the fleet. It has worked 41 times without losing a single ship of consequence. Why would the 42nd be different? The Vaith fleet made the same argument 60 years ago at a different boundary with different lights. Ulick kept his voice level. "There is footage." "The Vaith were undisciplined." Sorvon's hand moved to the medallion at his collar, one of many, and rested there the way it always did when he wanted the conversation to end. "We are not." Ulick pressed the data pad face down against the console. It was a small thing, and no one but him ever noticed it, and it was the only argument he had left to make. He had read all 900 pages of the threat assessment twice. He knew Sorvon had not read past the executive summary. He knew, too, that saying so a second time would not change anything, so he held his breath instead, the way he always did, and counted to 12. Back on Harrow Boundary Station, the beacons blinked on Vance's 12 screens in perfect rhythm, 400 kilometers apart, stretching off into black on either side. Nothing moved out there except the slow pulse of orange light, patient and small against all that empty space. They cut 3 beacons on the outer edge last night, Arties reported. Testing response time, probably. Probably, Vance signed the form in front of her without looking up. Do you think they actually cross? They always do. She almost smiled at that, almost, every single time. Governor Pale arrived on the station 2 days later with his intake documentation already filed, which told Vance more about the man than any introduction could have. He wanted assurances. She gave him the honest kind instead, that the compact had held this boundary for 3 years without losing a ship, and intended to keep holding it, and he did not find that as comforting as she meant it. That night, sensors caught the Rathan fleet shifting formation, tightening, the way a fist tightens before it swings. Vance watched it happen on the screens without moving from her chair. She opened a channel to Artie's quarters. It starts tomorrow. You're sure? I've watched that fleet for 3 weeks. I know what a fleet looks like right before it moves. A pause. Get some rest. He didn't, neither did she, though she never said so. Morning came the way it always did on a station with no real morning, marked by a shift change and a change in the light on the beacons. Sorvon gave the order at 600 station time. The 7th Expansion Fleet, 230 ships strong, began to cross. The beacons went dark one after another as the fleet passed through the boundary line, not destroyed, just switched off, deliberately, the way a door closes behind someone walking through it. Sorvon watched them go out and felt something close to satisfaction settle into his chest. Sensors showed nothing. No response. No ships waiting on the other side. Just empty space, exactly as it had looked for 3 years, exactly as it would keep looking for the next several minutes. Ulik watched the same readouts and felt the opposite of satisfaction. Empty space that stayed empty when 230 ships crossed a defended boundary was not a sign that no one was watching. It was a sign that someone had chosen, very carefully, not to be seen yet. On Harrow Station, Vance closed her incident report, set down her pen, and reached for the leather journal for the first time in 3 weeks. She did not open it either, not yet. The fleet crossed in full within the hour. 230 ships spread wide behind the dead beacon line, formation tight, weapons cold, moving the way a fist moves when it has already decided where it wants to land. Sorvon watched the tactical display and felt nothing change. No response. No hail. No ships waiting to greet them, hostile or otherwise. Just the same black he had crossed into 4 times before with 4 other fleets, on 4 other borders that had all, eventually, learned to call him High Marshal and mean it. Position confirmed, the helm officer reported. We are 11 minutes past the boundary line. Then we continue, Sorvon said. Ulik stood his 3 paces back and watched the sensor sweep return the same clean nothing it had returned since the crossing began. He had stopped finding that reassuring 6 minutes ago. The first mine went off against the hull of the destroyer Verath 6. The explosion was clean, precise, and took the port engine column apart in one burst. Not the reactor, not the crew decks, just the engine, the way a surgeon takes out exactly the organ that's failing and leaves the rest alone. Verath 6 didn't die. It just stopped. A second explosion followed against a cruiser 2 formations over. Then a third. Then a 4th and 5th in the same breath, scattered through the fleet like someone had been waiting with a list and started checking names off it the moment the order came to fire. Report, Sorvon's throat ridges flared bright. Mines, the tactical officer said, buried in the debris field. We flew through it without a full scan. There was nothing on approach sensors. High Marshal, nothing. Then scan now. Point defense came alive across the fleet, firing at threats that had already done what they came to do and had nothing left to hit. The mines weren't a wall. They were a funnel, place to push the fleet exactly where it was already going, into a tighter and tighter column, engines dying one at a time on the edges, while the center kept drifting forward, unaware. Ulik watched the pattern resolve on his own display and understood it before the tactical officer did. He pressed his data pad face down against the console, an old habit, useless now. There was no one left who needed convincing that something was wrong. Everyone could see it. A channel request lit up on the command display, unencrypted, addressed to the fleet directly. Sorvon opened it himself, jaw tight. Admiral Vance's voice came through without static, without heat, the same tone she might have used to close out a report. Hi, Marshal Krell. I am offering you a clean withdrawal right now. You have 60 seconds to respond before I stop offering. Sorvon's ridges pulsed harder. She is bluffing. I don't think she is, Ulik said. It was the first thing he had said unprompted in 6 minutes, and it landed in the silence like something dropped from a height. Sorvon turned, slow, and looked at him properly for the first time since the crossing. You have an opinion, Sub-Commander. I have a file, High Marshal, 900 pages of it. I've read what these people build when they think they'll need it, and they've had 3 years to build for this exact border. Ulik kept his hands still at his sides. I don't think the Admiral makes an offer she can't back. Sorvon looked at the countdown ticking down on the corner of the display. 40 seconds. 30. Full advance, he said. Hold formation and continue. We are not turned back by a warning shot and a woman's voice. The channel closed on Vance's end without another word. No anger in it. No last plea. Just silence, the particular kind that meant a decision had already been made somewhere else, minutes ago, and everything happening now was just the shape of it playing out. On Harrow Station, Vance set the open channel down and looked at Arties. Light them up. The dark between the asteroid clusters stopped being dark. Ships that had been sitting cold for 3 years, engines powered to nothing, life support running on the barest thread to stay off every passive sensor sweep, came online in sequence, not from ahead of the Rathan fleet, where anyone would have been watching, but from the sides, from behind. From the rock fields, the fleet had flown straight through without a second scan, because empty rock doesn't usually shoot back. 46 new contacts bloomed across Rathan's sensors in under a minute. A 47th stayed dark, somewhere out past the edge of the readings, exactly where it was supposed to be. That's not possible, the tactical officer said. Nothing was there. We swept that field on approach. You swept it for heat, Ulik said quietly. Cold ships don't have any to find. Sorvon stared at the new contacts, and for the first time in 312 years of command, felt the particular vertigo of realizing the map he'd been given was wrong. Not incomplete, not outdated, but wrong on purpose, by people who had known exactly what he would and wouldn't think to look for. The human ships didn't converge on the flagship. That was the detail Ulik noticed first, and the one that frightened him most. They spread instead, methodical, each one peeling toward a target that wasn't the biggest or the closest, but something else, something with a pattern he hadn't worked out yet. He worked it out 30 seconds later, when the first communication relay went dark mid-transmission. Every Terran ship was hunting the same class of target. Not warships, not the flagship. The small, lightly armored vessels that carried the fleet's coordination signal between formations. The ships nobody protected because nobody thought they mattered enough to protect. Comms are fragmenting, the communications officer reported, voice climbing. We're losing formation-wide relay. Orders aren't reaching the outer wings. Reroute through secondary channels. Secondary is down too, High Marshal. They took that first. 6 seconds. That was the delay now on anything routed through what was left of the network. 6 seconds between an order given and an order received, which didn't sound like much until a ship needed to turn in less time than that to avoid a collision with a formation mate that had just lost its engines. Ulik watched the first cascading collision happen on the display, 2 cruisers clipping hulls because neither had gotten the order to break formation in time, and felt something in his chest go very still and very cold. This was not a battle. It had never been a battle. A battle was two forces trying to destroy each other. This was a demonstration, and the demonstration was still only getting started. He looked at Sorvon, whose ridges had stopped pulsing entirely now. Gone the flat, dull color they turned when the fear underneath finally outran the anger on top of it. "High Marshal," Ulik said, "I recommend." "I know what you recommend," Sorvon said. "Full advance stands." Somewhere past the drifting wreck of Verath 6, more human targeting locks blinked green across the fleet's engine collars, one after another, patient, unhurried, exactly on schedule. The formation that had crossed the boundary 230 ships strong was, in the space of 11 minutes, no longer a formation at all. It was becoming something else. A shape Ulik didn't have a word for yet, made of dead engines and broken signal chains, and a high marshal who was still, even now, giving orders to a fleet that could no longer hear most of them in time to matter. Collision alarm was still screaming somewhere on Deck 3 when Ulik's console lit with a transmission he hadn't ordered and didn't recognize, routed in on a frequency the fleet hadn't used since before the crossing. "High Marshal," a new voice, older, careful. "This is Second Fleet. Admiral Breck requests visual." Sorvon's ridges twitched toward him. "Second Fleet is a reserve. They have no authority to request anything." "They're not asking your permission," Ulik said. "They're asking to see what's left of us." He put the feed through anyway. On the display, an older Rithan officer in Reserve Command Grey looked out at them across 200,000 kilometers of dead space, his own 200 ships holding formation well behind the boundary line, untouched, unmoving. "High Marshal Krell," Breck said, "I have received a sensor package from Terran Compact Forces, unencrypted, addressed to me directly." A pause, careful, almost gentle. "It shows your formation integrity at under half strength. I am holding position." "You will advance and support." "I will hold position," Breck said again, "until I understand what I am advancing into." The channel closed on his end. Sorvon stared at the space where the image had been, jaw set, and said nothing for the length of 3 full breaths. Ulik understood, watching him, that this was the moment the fleet had actually broken, not the mines, not the dead engines drifting where warships used to be. This. A reserve commander 200,000 kilometers back, choosing to wait and watch instead of charging in blind. "Formation integrity?" Sorvon asked, not looking away from the dead channel. 40%, the tactical officer said. "We have 7 minutes before it drops below the threshold for coordinated withdrawal. After that, High Marshal, we're not a fleet. We're a debris field with some of the pieces still capable of firing back." Sorvon's hand found the medallion at his collar again. This time it didn't seem to steady him. "Ram formation," he said. "Drive the center through whatever's holding the funnel open. If they want to disable ships, let them try to disable ships that are already committed to a straight line at full burn." Ulik's stomach went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the ship's recycled air. "High Marshal, if we push them into ram formation, the humans will disable the lead ships at range before any of them close to striking distance. We won't break through. We'll just lose the center too." "You have an alternative, Sub-Commander." He didn't. That was the worst of it. He had a file with 900 pages of exactly this outcome, predicted in careful, bloodless language, and not one page of it contained a way out that didn't start with an admission Sorvon wasn't ready to make. "No, High Marshal," Ulik said. "I don't." "Then transmit the order." Ulik transmitted it. His hand was steady doing it, which surprised him. Some small, distant part of him noted that steadiness and filed it away, the way he filed everything for later if there was a later. The ram formation surged forward on the display. What was left of the fleet's undamaged center, 40 ships pulling into a tight spear aimed at the gap in the human line. For 11 seconds, nothing happened, and Ulik let himself hope, briefly and uselessly, that the humans had run out of whatever they'd been using. Then the engine collar locks bloomed green across the spear formation, one after another, in the same unhurried rhythm as everything else that had happened today, and the ram formation stopped being a ram formation. It became 40 more drifting hulks, joining the wall the fleet had already built out of its own hull, adding to a shape that now stretched across nearly the whole width of the engagement zone. Sorvon watched his last committed force go dark and did not speak. On Harrow Station, Vance closed the incident report she'd been keeping open through the whole engagement, set it aside, and reached for a cup of water she didn't drink. She turned it once in her hand, set it back down, and opened the channel to Second Fleet herself. Admiral Breck, thank you for holding position. I read the sensor package you sent, Admiral Vance. Breck's voice carried none of the alarm she might have expected from a man watching his fleet's counterpart get taken apart in real time. It was thorough. It was meant to be. You could have destroyed them by now, all of them. Not an accusation, a genuine question, the kind that mattered. I could have, Vance agreed. Dead ships block corridors. Disabled ships can be towed clear. If we wanted them dead, Admiral, they would be dead. She let that sit a moment. We don't. A long pause on Breck's end. I understand you. I hope you do. I'd rather not have this conversation with the 8th Expansion Fleet next year. She closed the channel. Arties at the second station hadn't said anything in nearly 10 minutes, which for him was its own kind of alarm. She glanced over. You're quiet. I keep doing the math, he said. 230 ships came across that line. I keep trying to land on a number for how many of them are still whole, and I can't make myself finish the sum. Then don't finish it. Vance picked her pen back up, uncapped it, set it back down without writing anything. It'll be in the report either way. It was the kind of thing she said that sounded almost like comfort and wasn't quite, and Arties had learned 3 years ago not to ask her to make it kinder than that. She wasn't unkind. She was just already 3 steps further down the corridor than he was, looking back to make sure he didn't trip. Back on the Sovereign Mandate, the bridge had gone quiet in a way Ulik had never heard it go quiet before. Not the tense silence of a crew waiting for orders, but the flat silence of a crew that had stopped expecting the orders to help. Sorvon stood at the observation port again, the way he had stood there before the crossing, looking out at a very different view now. No orange lights blinking patient in the dark. Just his own ships, dozens of them, drifting engineless and dark against the stars, and somewhere beyond them, still hidden, still holding position, the human forces that had done this without losing a single vessel of their own that anyone could confirm. How many of ours are still capable of independent maneuver? He asked, not turning around. Under a third, High Marshal. Ulik kept his voice even. The rest are disabled, not destroyed. Their crews are alive. Life support reads nominal across every hull we can still get a signal from. Sorvon's shoulders moved, a small motion, almost a flinch. They left the crews alive on purpose. Yes. On every ship. As far as I can tell, yes, High Marshal. It wasn't a rescue, and it wasn't mercy exactly, and Ulik didn't have the right word for what it actually was. A message, maybe, written in a way that couldn't be misread by anyone who eventually had to explain the casualty numbers to a war council back home. Every crew alive, every ship recoverable, every single decision made by someone who had wanted this understood a very specific way. They planned this for years, Sorvon said, quiet now almost to himself. Not weeks, not since we crossed the boundary. Years. Ulik thought of the file on his own personal drive, the one with the full 900 pages, the one he had a feeling he would need again someday no matter how this ended. He didn't say so. There was nothing to be gained by it now, and Sorvon's ridges had gone the flat, dull color of a man doing arithmetic he didn't want to finish either. A new transmission request lit the board, not from Breck this time, not from the reserve fleet. The originating signature read Harrow Boundary Station, and beneath it, a single line. Admiral D. Vance requests direct channel with High Marshal Krell. Sorvon looked at the request for a long moment. Outside the viewport, the wall of his own drifting ships stretched on, patient and silent, exactly the shape the humans had built it to be, not a grave, not yet, just a very clear demonstration of what could have been won. "Open it," he said. Vance's image resolved on the flagship's main display, unhurried. The same woman who had spent 3 weeks watching this fleet through 12 screens and never once raised her voice about it. High Marshal Krell. Admiral Vance. Sorvon's throat ridges had gone still entirely now, past anger, into something that looked almost like attention. "You have my fleet." "I don't want your fleet." She glanced down, off-screen, at something on her desk. A form, maybe, or the leather journal Ulik had heard about but never seen. "I want 4 things, and then I want this border quiet again." "Say them." "Withdraw every remaining active ship to pre-expansion positions, effective immediately. Restore the boundary beacons your fleet disabled on the way in. We'll send the codes. Your engineers can handle the physical work. Issue a formal acknowledgement on record that Rathan forces crossed into Terran sovereign space without authorization. And return the 3 survey crews your empire has been holding along the Kepler approach for the last 4 months." Silence on the bridge. Ulik felt something in his chest tighten at that last one. He hadn't known about the survey crews. Sorvon, from the stillness in his shoulders, clearly had. "You knew," Sorvon said slowly, not quite a question. "We've known for a while." Vance's voice didn't change. "You crossed the boundary. We didn't have to guess why you'd want to." Sorvon looked at the wall of his own drifting ships one more time, then at the medallion he still hadn't stopped touching, and understood, Ulik watched him understand it, that there was no version of the next 10 minutes that ended with him keeping any of it. "Give me a moment," Sorvon said. He didn't ask for tactical options. He didn't call for a status update, or a casualty count, or anything that might have delayed the answer he'd already reached. He walked to the small side table near the command station, poured a half cup of recycled water from the dispenser there, and drank it slowly, looking at nothing in particular, the way a man does when he is giving himself 60 seconds to be an ordinary person, one last time before he has to be High Marshal again. Then he set the cup down and turned back to the display. "Ulik," he said, "open the wide channel, every installation, every receiver in range." It was the moment Ulik had already lived once, standing exactly here, 3 paces from where he stood now. Except this time he understood, watching Sorvon's hand steady on the console, that it hadn't been a memory playing back. It had been the future catching up to where the story actually started. The channel opened. Sorvon's voice came out very even. "The Terran Compact's territorial boundary markers are legally established and recognized under Galactic Convention. Rathan forces today operated within Terran sovereign space without authorization. All Rathan units are ordered to withdraw to pre-expansion positions. No ridges pulsing, no heat, just a man reading a list he had written for himself and did not enjoy." Vance watched the broadcast reach her own boards, watched the acknowledgement register across every Terran relay in range, and allowed herself exactly one small thing. Not a smile, just a slight easing at the corner of her mouth, gone before Artis could have named it if he'd been looking. "We are always ready," she thought. "We didn't fight. We didn't wait. We were simply always already here." She didn't say it aloud. There was no one left who needed convincing. The withdrawal took 3 days to complete, and 2 more for the recovery ships to finish their work. Rathan tow crews arrived first, running lights bright, weapons powered fully down, Vance allowed it, and had 2 Terran escorts accompany every single tow, not as a threat, just visible, a reminder written in hull plating instead of words. 58 disabled ships went out that way, engines dead, crews shaken but whole. 11 more had broken into sections too large to move as one piece and had to be cut apart where they drifted. The 3 survey crews came back a week after that, tired, thinner than they'd left, unharmed. No press event marked their return on either side of the boundary. The files simply closed, the way files did when the people writing them had gotten exactly what they'd come for. Governor Pale's report landed on Vance's desk 4 days after the withdrawal began, 47 pages, careful administrative language, laying most of the blame on poor Rithan risk assessment, and very little of it anywhere that might have touched his own intake documentation, filed suspiciously early, the week before any of this had started. He was, Vance thought, reading it through once and setting it aside, a very good bureaucrat. That skill would keep him employed longer than most of his convictions would. The War Council debated a diplomatic delegation for 11 days. Vance's response, when it finally came, ran 3 sentences. Diplomacy was reasonable and worth pursuing. The mine belt should not be reduced under any proposed goodwill gesture. She needed 2 more sensor arrays before the next fiscal cycle, regardless of how the talks went. Nobody argued the last 2 points. Nobody ever really did with her. On the sovereign mandate, in the last hour before his own fleet's remnant crossed back over the restored boundary line, Ulick Thorne moved the 900-page threat assessment off the ship's shared archive and onto a drive he kept in his own quarters, unlogged, the kind of thing that could get a sub-commander quietly reassigned if anyone ever looked closely enough to ask why. He had a feeling, not proof, just the particular weight in his chest that had been right about everything else so far, that he would need it again someday, some other border, some other high marshal who hadn't read past the summary. Sorvon didn't ask what had happened to the file. He didn't ask about much of anything those last few days. He stood at the observation port more than he used to, hands loose at his sides instead of resting on the medallion, and watched the same stretch of space he'd once called a string of lanterns. 6 weeks later, Harrow Boundary Station was running the way it always ran, quiet, routine. The incident reports back to being about supply schedules and equipment checks instead of fleet movements. The beacons were fully restored, every one of them relit along the 400-kilometer intervals, orange and steady, stretching off into the dark on either side of the station in a line that didn't end within sight. Vance finished the day's paperwork at the same desk she always used, closed the folder, and stood. Arties was still at the window, the way he'd taken to being most evenings now, watching the boundary line the way some people watched weather. "We are always ready," she said, passing behind him toward the corridor. "That's the whole point." He didn't turn around right away. Outside, the beacons blinked in their long, patient rhythm, no faster and no slower than they had been 3 years ago, before any of this, and no faster or slower than they would keep being for however long the border needed them. "Get some sleep, Arties." "In a minute." She left him there. The corridor door closed behind her with a small, ordinary sound, and the station kept running the way it always had, humming, lit, unremarkable, while beyond the viewport the boundary lines stretched on into the dark, marker after marker, steady and patient, right where they had always been.